This is your host, Steven Sargeant, the Around the Coin podcast. For 2.5 years, I sat behind the scenes producing one of the best crypto compliance podcasts in the world, the Public Key Podcast by Chainalysis. And we now have the former host, Ian Andrews, who's been in the blockchain space, the tech space. He's probably one of the most technical marketers that aren't working in product marketing side for some of the biggest companies, but he's now the chief revenue officer of Grok. He is in AI, and he's going to tell us all about AI. He's going to tell us how me and you can use it, what we should do to start our learning journey, what's happening in this space, what does inference mean, what does training mean, what are the chips doing, who's NVIDIA, are they a competitor of Grok, what's the difference between this Grok and Elon's Grok. He is going to spill the tea, as they say, on everything that's happening in the AI. We very rarely do an only AI post, because frankly, most companies probably just want to shill whatever product or wrapper they've created. But Ian is so thoughtful about the way he approaches new spaces, and he is going to give us the goods in this episode. If there's any episode that you want to learn about AI, and he even tells you who to learn from, this is going to be the one right here. Go listen to it, and go really, check out Ian on LinkedIn and Twitter, because he's putting out some pretty good content. And we're hoping he comes out with his own podcast on AI really soon. Here's the episode. I know you're going to love it. This is an Around the Coin feature episode because we got Ian Andrews, who's now the CRO of Grok. But me and Ian used to work together. I was behind the scenes when Ian produced over, I think, 150 episodes of the Chainalysis Public Key Podcast. So if you want to see an excellent host have some of the fascinating conversations, you guys got to check out the early episodes of the Chainalysis Public Key Podcast. Ian, we now have you in the hot chair to talk about everything AI, because now you're the CRO of Grok. So maybe just give a little background of who you are from maybe your VMware days all the way to now.
Well, I don't know how much time we have. I'll do the quick run through. So I've spent now 25 years in early stage technology companies. Some that might be memorable. Early in my career, worked at places like Opsware and Endeca. More recently, spent 9 years at a company called Pivotal that we took public in 2018 and later sold to VMware for about $2.5 billion. I spent 4 years at Chainalysis, leading the marketing organization, and just in December joined Grok, which is one of the hottest companies in the artificial intelligence space, and it's been an absolute blast.
I thought you were gonna say what you spent. When you said you exited the company and you're part of that for $2 billion. I thought you were gonna say, and I spent it on the Lambo or something cool like that. But tell me, in the world of tech, that's pretty much three winners, right? Like you go to before VMware acquires the company, then Chainalysis, and now Grok, which is like nobody. Now I would say nobody really knows about it, and then it's like all of a sudden I'm hearing Grok, battling NVIDIA. It's like obviously one of those up and comers that's a serious contender in the space, if not taking a significant market share. How are you, maybe for those entrepreneurs that are like, hey, I want to go back in and work with companies, or for people that are in payments and tech, how are you picking these tech winners? Is there any way you approach looking at these jobs, or you're just like dartboard and going for it?
There's a little more, I think, calculus behind it than just throwing darts at a board. For me, I've always been tech first. It's hard for me to get excited about working at a company if I'm not fascinated by the technology. Joining Chainalysis, it was a space I knew very little about, but it seemed like they had really cracked this concept of looking at data on the blockchain and making it useful to humans. I got really excited about that. That drove my decision to join the company. With Grok, I spent maybe the better part of 2024 looking at AI. I was making up projects at work actually to use AI to actually try and apply it in our jobs, to make selling more efficient and to make our marketing team more productive. And at some point I realized, hey, I need to be in the space, and started talking to a number of different companies to really see where the opportunity was. And what became clear to me with Grok is they had built something incredibly special with a very clear value proposition, which was, in order to run AI models, you need it to be fast, you need it to be high quality, and you need it to be affordable. And Grok is all three. So 10x faster than NVIDIA, a third the price, a fifth of the power consumption. Like, it's a winning story. And the decision to go here was also driven not just by that technology, but by the market trend, right?
Right.
Me, it became really kind of obvious that the next decade is all about AI moving into every piece of technology, right? This is going to change how we live, how we work. And so you jump on the market trend with a great company, and it gives you the opportunity to have an outsized success, which is
And I think,
what we're aiming
yeah.
for here at Grok.
And I think you're right. There was kind of these phases, like I'm, going into my 44th year. It's like the first kind of 10 years was like all about the new internet. And then there was like social media on the internet. Then it was like, hey, blockchain for every company. And now it's like AI is kind of that baby
Yeah.
where it's like, we need to implement it somehow. And I remember having
Yeah.
those discussions like, hey, what are you learning about? And you would always bring up like, yeah, I'm dabbling in AI.
Yeah.
I'm curious with, so much VC money in the AI space.
Yeah.
How did you look at, like, I'm sure a lot of companies like, hey, we can do this and we have this
Yeah.
funding, but everything has that AI type of wrapper versus like, hey, this is going to be the picks and shovels of AI. Did you
Yeah.
see a lot of companies that had that funding that were, hey, we need a marketing or a revenue person to really drive this? How did you avoid those shiny objects, I would say, in your career?
Well, I talked to a lot of companies that I think fit the profile of what you're describing, which is raised a lot of capital, had built an interesting product that maybe was seeing some growth. But for me, there was a lot of skepticism about who ends up as an enduring winner here versus a flash in the pan.
Right.
It turns out, in the age of AI, it's incredibly easy to get a prototype product to market. And there's a large cohort of users who are very excited to try anything new.
Mhm.
And the question is do those new users stick around beyond the first or second monthly bill, and can you continue growing after that initial pop of excitement, and do you have any differentiation? And I think I talked to a lot of companies that couldn't really answer those second and third questions, right? They got out of the gate quickly, and then they're like, oh man, like growth is slowing down, users are churning out, we're not quite sure how to retain folks or be competitive. Because I think there's two things that you've got to have to be a successful company, right? You need a great product that's well aligned to the market demand, but you also need to have like a distribution strategy. And in AI, it's kind of unclear right now, will the market produce a lot of startup disruptors, or will the big incumbents who already have distribution advantage win? To give you a specific example, like, Google is building great models that are very affordable. They're running them on Google Cloud, so you and I can go use Gemini, but they're also building great products that just kind of plug into the overall Google Workspace environment. If you've used Google Slides lately, you probably have seen like Gemini will now create slides for you in the product. So am I going to go use a third-party product that builds slides? Like, that's a hard decision to get a large number of users to move to that new application if it's already in the product you use. And Google can offer a good enough experience and probably capture a substantial portion of the market because it's just there. It's a feature rather than a standalone company. So for me, making that decision was really trying to qualify who's got the potential to be a standalone enduring company versus a feature in somebody else's product. And when I looked at Grok, that became very clear to me that there was opportunity for us to build something that will be here for years and decades to come.
That's so funny because when I was designing the questions, I'm using Google Docs, and then like there's this little thing that said, "Hey, Gemini wants to know if you want to shorten this question a little bit." I'm like, "Hey, I'll click on it. Like, I'm not gonna go Google get Gemini to use it or download on an app browser." I'm like, "Hey, they did a pretty good job." I'll tell you which question it is when it comes up, but I'm
That's
like,
right.
yeah, that's interesting. I wouldn't go out to find Gemini probably,
Yeah.
but now they've implemented in the things I do every single day. Where it's
Exactly.
like, why wouldn't I just click on it and try it?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
There's millions of users using Google Workspace every day. And so those millions of users, now you have, like, as a startup offering an equivalent product, such a higher bar to go win them as a customer.
If someone
Right.
from Google is listening, if they could find a way to take these large video files that I have and be like, hey, do you still need this for a client, or can we delete this and free up a little bit more space for you? I know it comes up when I'm at like 90%, but if they could just do that on a regular basis. I'm curious, Ian, why did you go into like general marketing and,
Yeah.
chief revenue officer?
Yeah.
You're super technical.
Yeah.
I would think people that with your, skill set, they might go into like more on the product marketing side or,
Yeah.
more on, why did you go into like, hey, we're going to lead the company and I'm going to do this overall marketing? Because I think you're
Yeah.
still one of the most technical marketers that I've seen. And I've talked to a lot of marketers in this
Yeah.
space.
Well, I always think about my interest and maybe depth in technology as being my secret weapon, right? I in every role that I've had from when I was first starting out as an inside sales rep, a few days out of college, the thing that was very clear to me was understanding the products that I was representing allowed me to be much more valuable and build much better relationships with customers and prospects. And so from the earliest days of my career, I leaned into that. Everywhere that I've worked, I've spent a lot of time with our engineering teams and our product leadership to really understand both our technology and how it fits in the market. And as I've kind of moved up the career ladder, I would say, even though I've had marketing and sales leadership roles, I spend a lot of time collaborating with the product and engineering team and helping to shape the product roadmap. And I think that's kind of set me apart. It's given me many of the opportunities that I've had in my career is as a result of that. Not sitting back and saying, "Hey, I'm just here as the guy who gets leads. I don't really understand what the product does." And you'd be surprised how many people in marketing or sales, take that approach. I see bad sales reps who show up to meetings and they introduce everybody and they say, "Okay, I'm the guy that, brought the donuts and the coffee. I'm going to turn it over to my sales engineer and he's going to explain what the product does." Like, I just don't see that as being like a valuable role. And so I think for people listening who are kind of trying to plot their career strategy, if you are, technically adept, like lean into that. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a technologist as your primary job, but like we live in a world of technology. Like know what you're talking about, invest the time, get smart.
And I think that's what we don't see a lot. And in all industries, it's like the marketers know how to market, but they don't know exactly they're telling you what the features are, but they don't really know how those features solve the problems for the customers. 'Cause
Totally.
they've never, as you said, they've never gone deep enough to understand that. And I think that's a disconnect that most people, everyone's had when they've talked to a sales rep. Is like, hey, can you do this? And the sales rep's like, yeah, let me get back to you. Let me talk to the product person.
Yeah.
I'll bring them on our next call. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, you
Yeah.
should have somewhat of an understanding of like, hey, it's possible, but it's some nuance to it. Take me back now, because I remember when we started the Chainalysis Public Key podcast, what I thought made it so successful was you said, hey, you know what? I want to take people on the same journey I had when I started out in blockchain. And,
Yeah.
the first couple of years I'm learning, let's do this for AI. Take us, you've only been there a few months, but
Yeah.
take us through that journey. Like, what
Yeah.
have you learned? What's a big myth in the industry?
Yeah.
Like, walk us through some of that those early stage learning that you're like, oh, this clicked for me, or this makes a lot more sense, or from the outside,
Yeah.
AI seems like this, but it's really like that.
Well, I think there's kind of two camps if you look at the broad world of one, AI is going to replace all the humans and no one's going to have jobs. That's like the idealistic sort of ultimate productivity standpoint. The other camp is, oh, the AI is going to build robots who are going to kill all the humans or enslave us or something silly like that. Neither of those stories are true. But if you read just headlines in mainstream media, you would get to that conclusion that one of those two things is the future. I think the reality is we're about to see an explosion of productivity. Like the humans are going to get an order of magnitude more capable. And this is in every discipline. So if you're a salesperson, if you're a marketer, if you're a product engineer, if you're a software developer, if you're a product manager, like pick a role, and AI is going today can make you 3 times, 5 times more effective. And I think over the next 18 to 24 months, you see that move to like 10x to 100x more productive.
Wow.
And so, my encouragement would be don't sit back and try and read about this, like go use it. And you can do it in really small ways. Like one of my favorite products is Superhuman. It's an email client. I've been using it since Superhuman first launched. They're funded by my good friend Ed Sim, so I got like the early beta invite when the product first came out. And initially their pitch was really simple. It was like incredibly fast email. So it sits on top of Gmail or Outlook. It goes really fast. It's got a great mobile client. And it's a user experience I can't get away from. It's a product I pay for out of my own personal pocket, a significant amount of money every month. They've recently introduced AI. And at first it was like, oh yeah, we'll help you like refine your email or, maybe craft an auto response for you, which were not features that for me drove a lot of productivity. Oftentimes the tone and voice wasn't quite right. But just recently, they introduced a feature that creates automatic follow-up emails. So it looks at your message that you've sent to somebody, and it will, if it goes by without a response for a day, it will automatically populate back at the top of your inbox a pre-drafted email that follows up on the previous message. And this is so awesome to me. It is one of the coolest features that is incredibly time saving. I no longer have to track like, did this person get back to me?
Right.
Do I have a note of like, follow up with this person if I don't hear from them in a day? And then I got to sit down and write the email. It's like, all I have to do is hit send. And
that makes a lot of sense. I think as anyone working at any function, that seems like, oh, Ian, that's not a huge deal. But when you're like, hey, I'm a business, I was supposed to get back to this person. Oh, it's only been a couple days. And then you go back to your Gmail. It's like 17 days ago, you sent me an email. You're like, whoa, how did 2.5 weeks go by without me following up with them?
Totally. And, for people like ourselves, I'm on Slack and Signal and Telegram and iMessage and email, like just keeping track of all the conversations is difficult. So having the app actually take control of that and go, oh, clearly this is a conversation that needs following up on and the thread's been dropped and is like proactively prompting me is an incredible productivity boost. But there's nothing technical about it at all. In fact, it's the reverse. Like it doesn't require me to know or understand AI in the least, but it's incredibly helpful. I'll give you another example, which is for anybody who's, in a sales role, you probably do customer proposals all the time, and often you're responding to requirements the customer gave you. So, maybe a formal RFP or maybe just a basic one that's like, hey, Steven, I need a proposal that needs like these 10 things. So the other day we had one of these pretty comprehensive, like 4 pages of requirements covering, technical details all the way to like economics and, details about our support offering, SLAs that we offer. We put together a package, like comprehensive proposal. A bunch of us reviewed it, so a lot of time went into this. And we said, hey, before we submit it, let's just ask one of these LLMs if we've done a good job. And so we uploaded the RFP document, the original requirements, and we uploaded our response and said, hey, what do you think? Would you improve anything? Like really simple prompt. There was no like crazy prompt engineering going on here. And the output was like, well, you said this in response to question like 2, and then you seem to contradict yourself down here in question 15. And you didn't really answer question 8. Like you sort of missed the response there. And, question 22 felt like your answer is a little confusing and you should consider revising it in the following way.
I love that.
Right. And again, like you don't have to be a technologist to do this. We literally uploaded 2 files that we had already created and got a response back, almost instantaneously. That was incredibly thoughtful, that had, things that we had missed as humans reviewing it. And so, probably saved us, a day's worth of extra review. It would be like the way to quantify that and helped us produce a much better response for the client.
That's amazing. Can you walk us through what Grok is? So it's funny because I sent you a message, I think it was a few months ago. I'm like, oh my God, they're talking about your company on the All In podcast. Yeah. You have to go listen to this episode. And you're like, no, that's not the Grok that I work for. It's like, Grok AI, which is like Elon's thing. Yeah. So maybe just level set that for everyone because they've probably heard Grok in so many different contexts. Let's separate what's Grok that you work for and Grok that Elon's working on.
Yeah. So Elon Musk's company is called XAI. And XAI has a product, their LLM, which is called Grok with a K. That's definitely not my company. My company is Grok with a Q. We were founded by a gentleman named Jonathan Ross. Jonathan is famous for his work at Google, where he built Google's AI chip, which is called the Tensor Processing Unit, or TPU. TPU today runs the artificial intelligence and machine learning services behind all of the big, well-known Google applications. So it backends everything from like Waymo's self-driving cars to Google Search to Google Translate to a ton of other services. So basically, if you've ever done anything with Google, you've kind of touched the TPU. And Jonathan, while he was at Google, had this realization that while Google was clearly far out in front of the market, the rest of the world would ultimately catch up in terms of their needs around machine learning. And so he left Google in 2016 to found Grok and build for the world the technology that would enable them to run the algorithms and machine learning tools that would power their businesses. Now, like a lot of visionary founders, Jonathan got the direction right, but the timing totally wrong.
That's what I was going to say. That was like 9 years ago. We haven't been talking about AI until that. What was he doing for the first 6 years?
Struggling to sell products. And he'll be very open about this, right? So the team, he assembled a world-class team who built the Grok chip. So at the core of our technology stack, we actually design and manufacture our own semiconductors. We call that an LPU. And at first, there really was no workload that would warrant a customer switching from whatever their default kind of CPU or GPU product line that they were using to something like Grok, right? An unproven, unknown startup showing up with this crazy new chip design. It wasn't something that a lot of people were ready to jump into. And so they struggled commercially until really the last 2 years. And in that time, there were two big unlocks. So first, ChatGPT launched, that was a little over 2 years ago. And that was the moment where I think the world woke up and said, whoa, AI is real and it's going to change everything about how we live and work. And then as people started digging into it, they're like, this is going to command a totally different compute architecture. Like we can't just deploy this on some random EC2 instance and it's going to power our business. Obviously, NVIDIA has profited enormously from this, right? You probably saw their recent quarterly earnings, $40 billion in revenue, 70% profit margins. They're making a bank. I think they're now the second or third most valuable company in the world. But people looked at that and said, well, but there's got to be alternatives, right? It's hard to get NVIDIA chips. It's hard to, they're expensive to acquire, expensive to operate. What else is available in the market? And that led this moment of people getting very interested in Grok. And so that really kicked up in 2023. But I would say we still had a product packaging mismatch because AI is really a developer-led transformation, right? People are building applications that use AI. And when you show up to a software developer and say, hey, I can give you faster, cheaper, super high quality inference, people are like, yes, I love that. Please do. And then you say, here are my chips. They're like, dude, it's 2025. What am I going to do with a bunch of chips? Like, that's not give me an API in the cloud.
Right.
And so our second big unlock was at the beginning of 2024 when we launched Grok Cloud. Because now you didn't have to take my word for it that Grok is fast and that Grok is high quality and that, the prices are incredibly reasonable. You could go try it. So right now, anybody that's interested can go to console.grok.com and create an account in about 30 seconds. And you can be using Grok and you can experience the speed for yourself. You don't have to trust me. You don't have to, hope that some slide I showed you in a meeting is true. Just go set it up. And if you've built something on OpenAI, we implement their API stack. So if you've already got an app running, you can take it and point it at Grok's API in about a minute. The most minor code change you could imagine, just repointing to a different endpoint and try us out. And
what
that
was the issue before then? So it's like you're saying, hey, here's a chip. And they're like, well, now I have to figure out what to do with the chip to make this faster.
Yeah.
Now with Grok Cloud, you're like, hey, we'll use the chips in the
That's
background.
right.
You just jump on and use the technology. Is that kind of the...
That's it. We took all the complexity out of it. So instead of you buying chips from us or buying, servers full of chips or racks full of servers, and then we'll, ship them to you in your data center. And like, we took all that complexity out of it. So we've built a global network, incredibly scaled, highly redundant, always available. And you can try it out right now. And because of that, we've seen over 1 million people sign up for Grok Cloud in the last 13 months. We've got 175,000, monthly active users. We've got thousands of people now on our paying tier. It's been incredible growth. we're now serving tens of billions of tokens every single day out of Grok Cloud.
That's crazy. What's interesting is I was watching the clip of a podcast with the CEO, Jonathan. He's basically saying, hey, we're doing a favor for NVIDIA. We're not really competing with them. We're taking a thing that they don't really want to do, and we're doing that the best versus like competing like who has the best chip. You kind of explain that concept of like, is NVIDIA only chips and you are chips and like access to the technology?
Yeah.
Is that kind of the difference between Grok and NVIDIA?
I think maybe stepping back a little bit, there's two big workloads that you're going to do with GPUs or with Grok. One is training, where you're actually creating a model. And if you maybe read in the news about Elon building this mega cluster down in Memphis, Tennessee, and doing it, in the record time, that's a cluster for training. And training it's a fairly complex process. You need to assemble a ton of information, complex pipelines, like really very technically complex. And there's probably, tens of companies in the world who are doing training at scale.
Right.
You can think about, the big model providers, OpenAI, Anthropic, the big cloud providers like Google obviously does a lot in the AI space, specifically with DeepMind, XAI, obviously doing that as well. Companies like Mistral. It's a relatively short list, compared to all the companies in the world. But those firms are spending hundreds of millions, probably billions of dollars on training infrastructure. They're building incredibly large clusters of NVIDIA GPUs. Now, Grok doesn't do that at all. That's not our business. We don't do training at all. We only do what's the other side of the market, which is called inference. And inference is kind of one of these fancy, like inside the technology bubble words. When I got here, I was like, why does everyone keep saying inference? I had to Google it. Easier way.
I Googled it and I still didn't understand. I Googled it before this session, still didn't understand what it meant.
Easier way to think about it. It's the part where you run the model. So after you've trained the model, you're going to run it so users can actually interact with it. So if you've ever gone to ChatGPT and typed in a prompt, that's inference, right? Nothing more or less than that.
Where training is like the amount of data that ChatGPT is ingesting so that when you do that, run that search, it's able to spit out the answer. Okay, understood.
That's right. And so training is kind of generally like a one-time process. So for each version of the model that exists, it's been through, a process that, took anywhere from like 3 to 10 months, but it's one-off. And at the end of that training process, you have a model, and then you're going to run that model for every user that touches it or interacts it is an inference request. And so if you just kind of think about this from a market sizing and opportunity landscape, there's, let's call it 50 companies that are doing serious at scale training. And then you've got basically every company in the world is going to do inference. Every application, every piece of software will incorporate AI over the next couple of years. And every human on the planet will be constantly triggering or interacting with these models to produce some output. Right. Like you and we're recording this podcast right now. You're going to take the output of this podcast and you'll feed it through some sort of software that will produce a transcript. That's inference. Right. Exactly. You'll then create a bunch of social media clips that automatically edit the videos and create some tweets and some LinkedIn posts. You'll feed that through an LLM to either write it the first time or maybe clean up what you draft. That's inference. So now multiply that times, 8 billion people on the planet, and inference will be the much larger workload. I mean, even Jensen Huang at NVIDIA said it's 1 billion times bigger than the training opportunity.
And that's where the speed comes in from Grok, because you need, like, if it's going to be that much bigger, speed is going to be the differentiator, right? Like, you don't want to sit there for an hour and 50 minutes to get one answer. You want to type something in ChatGPT or Perplexity, and we need that answer yesterday, right?
That's totally right. And if you think about it, training is an offline exercise. Like, there's no humans interacting with it. Obviously, the researchers who are conducting the training run, they care a little bit about speed, but there's no interactivity to that process. But when you start to think about end users touching an application, like, you want it quick. But let me give you another leg up in this, right? Everyone's talking about agents.
Right.
And agents, I had the CEO of a company called Crew AI at my sales kickoff last week. His name's Joe Mora, incredible leader, has built a fantastic company. And at some point I said, Joe, like, how big are you guys? talk to my team about how we should work together. And he goes, well, we now employ 150 agents and 30 humans.
Wow.
Right. So he talks about the agents, in the same context as the people in the company, because they've got a level of autonomy and authority to actually go take action and do work inside the business. And if you just think about that ratio at Crew AI, there's kind of 5 agents for every human. Right. So now instead of running a team of people, you're running a team of the, semi-autonomous software processes. So you're the marketing leader. You might have somebody that's working on, monitoring social media. And then you've got another agent that's working on, content production, and a third agent that's working on content promotion, and maybe somebody that's monitoring like your promotional ad spend. Right. So, we used to think about those as human roles. Now think about them as agent roles. And in reality, it's probably not a single agent. It's actually like tens of agents, what the crew team calls a crew of agents, who kind of interoperate together to solve like a domain-specific problem. And in that world, the speed starts to compound, right? It's not just like you or I looking at a screen and kind of typing back and forth. It's suddenly like, tens or hundreds or thousands of these autonomous processes that are interoperating with each other, and they can go as fast as the computers can go. And so inference speed in that world becomes even more important than what you just said.
The pushback I feel with AI is people like, but what about the EQ? And it's, similar to smart contracts, they have to do exactly what you feed into them and tell them to do, which doesn't leave much room for creativity.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Because it's great to have that human intellect and that, maybe empathy, but it's also a lot of the process you just said, like 5 to 1 humans, those 5 humans aren't going to be coming to you about vacation days or come down sick. So what are your thoughts about like, hey, this is the exact reason why we probably need more AI agents versus like, hey, they're going to take jobs of people that are going to add in that extra that's going to make that product special.
Yeah, I would contest the premise of the question. I actually think that you can have an AI interaction that is incredibly empathetic, sympathetic, feels human in a lot of ways, and I think we're going to continue improving on that nexus, right? Like one of the most popular use cases right now is improving call center experience. Right. And so it's not about let me churn off the human as quickly as possible, like just give them their information in kind of an unfriendly way. And that's not the case at all. It's actually, how can we provide a higher level of service, a better customer experience, a more useful, greater customer satisfaction outcome from the process? And so I'm going to challenge you a little bit there. I think the machines can do a good job there.
And to your point, the whole the worst part of customer service is like how quickly you actually get to a human. That's the problem. It's like we want to talk to a human. We just don't want to go through 17 prompts to get there and then be on hold for 45 minutes because we're mad by the time the human gets on the phone.
Totally. And half the time that individual isn't empowered to make a decision that you want them to make anyway, right? Like, hey, I need a refund, or hey, I had a problem with the product I bought from you, or hey, the thing you're charging me for is not actually what I ordered. Like all of those questions, you get that level 1 agent and they're like, well, I actually can't resolve that problem. Exactly. So then you sit on hold longer to get to another person who escalates it to another person. And like, well, we'll get back to you in a month. Like that entire process is pretty well known. Like we've all experienced it with one of our providers or vendors. And I think we have the opportunity to completely change that landscape of experience.
Yeah, that's huge. I'm curious though, like let's put on your business technical hat. I don't know if there's a physics, portion of this. It seems like Elon broke a lot of physics when he went through what he did in the US and built that huge training model. What keeps you from being 200x faster or 300x faster? Like what's the constraint with the speed? Like how fast could you get, or what's the path on becoming faster? Because I'm always interested when someone says they're 100 times faster. It's like, well, I'm sure your clients are also asking you like, hey, what gets me to 150 right now before the rest of my competitors?
Yeah. Well, we're building semiconductors, and so it is a physics problem, right? You're dealing in speed of light and density that you can pack transistors on a chip. Grok has a super exciting hardware roadmap. We're going to be introducing, both new chips and repackaging of increasing density. Like there's a ton of stuff on our roadmap where, the type of speed ups that you're talking about are coming very soon. So the performance story only gets better. The economics of the offering only get better over time. The more to come on that later in the year.
I love it. We have a lot of payment tech founders, entrepreneurs listening to this podcast. A lot of them, obviously, similar to how we thought about crypto, are thinking about AI. You seem like from the, last time we talked maybe in December to now, like you're well versed. You're talking about light and density. You're talking about semiconductors.
Yeah.
What was your path to learning about AI? Was it just like white papers? Was it reading books? Was it watching videos?
Yeah.
Was it just listening to other people talk? What was your learning path like? And maybe we can steal some of your processes.
Number one, just go start using it. Like, don't worry about the words like, oh, I don't know what inference is, or I don't understand how training works. Like, it doesn't matter. You don't actually need to know any of that. So don't be intimidated by the jargon or the underlying technology. Like, pick a thing that you're doing, and it can be trivial. My wife and I are taking the kids on spring vacation coming up, and the place we're going, we get sort of a menu. We can kind of build our own menu for the time we're there for like breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I was like, I don't have time to sit down and figure out, 4.5 days worth of meals. And so I just took the menu and I sent it to one of these LLMs and I said, hey, here's what we like to eat. Here are the options, build me a 4.5 day menu, leave out one dinner because we'll go out. And, one breakfast is Easter breakfast. So it needs to be pancakes. And like 10 seconds later, it spit back a menu.
I love that.
Right. And so stuff like that is how you learn this stuff. You start to see where it's good, where it's bad. And I would say, sign up for a bunch of the services. Most of them have good free tiers, but go around, pick the problem that you're interested in. I had another one recently where we were attending a conference and we got a list of all the attendees. It was like 2,500 people. And we wanted to be able to go filter it down and, pick out the people that were most relevant for us to try and schedule meetings with. And then we needed to track, had we set up a meeting, had we got a response to outreach, like kind of a flow chart of like where we were in the progression. But the list was sent to us as a PDF file.
Right.
And it had some really weird formatting in it. So it wasn't like you just copy paste and drop it in.
The L might be an I, or calling people by different names.
Yeah. It was a total mess. And I don't write code for a living, right? As much as you call me technical, I don't feel that technical most days. But I was like, what I need here is like a parser to actually run this. And I was like, I'm sure there's like a library in Python that can just take a PDF, parse all this data out, and it'll give me a CSV file I can open in Google Docs. I was like, but I don't know how to write that code. And, I went to Claude, described the problem, gave it the document. It didn't get it right on the first time, so I had to give it some more feedback. But at the end of it, I had a piece of Python code that I could execute, and I got, all the data that I wanted.
That's crazy.
Right?
And that's what I kind of like about it. It might not get the answer the first time, so it actually forces you to think a little bit more critically, which only makes you smarter as a human being, because now you're like, oh, I got to stage 1. How do I get to stage 2? And it's like that critical thinking partner now that you have that you didn't have before. Because if you couldn't get past stage 1, that was it, right? You close down the laptop and call it a night. That's
totally right. And that's maybe the biggest piece of advice I would give to people is like, when you pick a problem and you go try and solve it using one of these tools, there's a good chance that you don't get the output you want on the first try, or even the second or third try. And I've seen people kind of dismiss AI and be like, it doesn't, it's a toy, it'll never replace me, therefore I don't need to engage with it. And I think that's the wrong approach. Like, I would actually suggest that you think about it as an intern. Like, if you've ever had an intern work for you, somebody who's, totally green, probably still in college, maybe even a high school intern. If you think about the LLM as being at that level of expertise, now when you ask it to do things, provide the same level of granularity and specificity that you would to an intern who's never done the task before. And if you operate in that way and you get like, oh yeah, I got back like 70% of what I was looking for here, like that's pretty good for an intern, right? On a task they've never accomplished. Now like refine the request in such a way that, you move it from 70 to like 85 or 90%. And then if you start to think about it, like how long would it have taken you on your own to get to like 90% good on the task? And how quickly can you now do the last 10% on your own? And you've probably saved, hours, maybe days worth of work. So that, to me, that's the best way to learn. Go get hands-on, actually try and use this in some real day-to-day tasks. The second thing I would say is like, there are a ton of really smart people out there who, if you want to get into the technology, you want to understand, like, when Ian says a training run, like, what does training actually mean? Like, how does that work? Or you've heard about like transformer architectures. Like, what is a transformer? Like, all this stuff is accessible. There's some great people to follow. Like, I would say Andre Karpathy is probably one of the deepest technologists who has an incredible way of explaining this tech to people. So if you Google him, he's put out recently a couple 3-hour video series that takes you through all of this stuff. And so if that's what you're interested in, like, go look him up, start there. The other person I would mention is Andrew Ng with NG. Andrew has built free training courses. He's built a whole academy that you can start at a very high level and go as deep into the technology as you want. I would go follow those two people and just start consuming that content. And I promise in a few weeks, you will be probably above, 70-80% of the general population on this stuff.
I love that. And, nobody's been listening to these people for like 6 years. So like they're dying to talk to somebody now that they have a captive audience, because for 6 years, they've been building and hustling and, teaching, and there's been nobody in the classroom really. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about like any regulatory requirements? Obviously, you've been at Chainalysis. You saw regulatory landscape with blockchain. We hear about like the safety and guardrails of AI. We don't want this to spool out of control. What, if any, guardrails or any requirements that you're thinking about as you look at Grok?
I'm a little bit skeptical of the people who are running around claiming that AI is going to take over the world. I've always been pro technology. I think every time we've had a major kind of technological improvement or shift, we've seen major increases in quality of life and productivity. And I look at AI the same way. I think there is massive upside and limited downside. So anytime I hear the folks advocating for like increased AI safety, or like, let's not let the companies train models at an advanced pace, or like we need to limit the number of chips that are available, like all of that to me feels like total nonsense.
Right.
It's the equivalent of saying, no, we can only manufacture 10 cars a year because we're worried about the horse industry.
Right.
I'm sure people made the same arguments 100 years ago, but it makes no sense to me. So
remember when the internet came, they were like, oh my God, what's going to happen to everyone that's making paper? Nobody's going to use the right letters or use documents anymore, and the post office is going to close down. Yeah. I remember that. I was there for that.
Yeah. And look, things are going to change. I'm not saying that everything's going to stay the same. I'm not saying that people's jobs won't be affected. I'm not saying that there's not going to be some temporary or even midterm kind of downside for certain places or cases, but the net effect for society is going to be major increase in productivity, which I think will unlock an incredible amount of opportunity and wealth for society at large. Just the access to knowledge and information instantaneously for everyone who's connected to the internet around the world, which is now, most people, is such an opportunity that alone, if we just stopped with education and said none of the knowledge worker productivity tasks, I would say that AI is totally worth it. Every dollar that's been spent to this point is totally worth it. So I'm all about as fast as possible, not slow us down.
And we have to remember, our kids are going to grow up in this. Just like, we have those crypto native kids, and, the social media native kid. Like, our kids are only going to grow up knowing that they can get their answers quickly, fast, and they have to think about what the next question is going to be. But you talked, interesting enough about consumption. What are your thoughts? Because, as soon as Bitcoin came on the scene, there's people protesting on how much energy is going into Bitcoin. Seems like AI is consuming a lot
more energy
than minting blocks on the blockchain. So what are your thoughts? I don't hear any protesters about the actual consumption as much. Do you have any thoughts?
People are talking about it. It's not as loud because I think the difference between crypto and AI is that there's a more obvious use case, applicability, productivity for the average person.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like my wife is using AI to plan our vacation, as I was mentioning earlier. So for her, it's like, oh, this is great.
Right.
Whereas crypto, she was always a skeptic. She's like, I don't understand why this exists. Magic money on the internet is not like a thing that I have a use for in my life. And so I think when you have that skepticism toward a particular technology, you're inevitably going to look for the downside. In the case of Bitcoin, power consumption is kind of an obvious one to pick on. In the case of AI, I just think there's fewer people that are really focused on the downside because it's so useful. It's so obvious, like why we want this thing to exist,
Right.
that you're actually now, rather than concerned about power consumption, you're concerned about availability of power. You're like, we need to fire back up the nuclear reactors, build more, build, baby, build.
Right. Not use less, find more. I think, yeah, where it's like, hey, we're using what energy to mint a cartoon camel with a cigar? Like, that doesn't have the same effect as like, hey, this person just helped me do my job 5 times faster so I can spend more time with my kid.
Exactly.
Before we go, Ian,
Yeah.
what are you looking forward to, whether it's at Grok? What are you seeing? Is there anything that like completely blew your mind? Like, hey, I didn't even think about AI for this, but it's coming.
Oh man, there's so much stuff. The future is bright here. It feels like every week we're seeing new models be released. Just in the last couple months, people probably heard about DeepSeek, where this kind of relatively unknown Chinese lab that was started by a quant trading firm built a state-of-the-art, kind of world-beating model for a fraction of the spend that we've seen from some of the U.S. labs. And I think they kind of proved to the world that this race isn't over. It's not won by 2 or 3 American companies. This is a global phenomenon that really anyone can participate in. And so, the capabilities that are coming out in every dimension. Microsoft put out a model the other day that is able to generate video game scenes kind of live from taking samples of games. So entirely new levels being created kind of dynamically. You've got, video companies building videos that I can't tell the difference between a professionally shot movie and something that was generated from a text prompt. And so all of these technologies are just at the beginning, right? We're just figuring out how they work and how to apply them. And so as I look forward over the next year, like all of these things are just going to keep advancing at such a speed that, the world is bright. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I love it. And you're posting more actively on LinkedIn. We see you on Twitter. We'll make sure to include those in the notes because it's fascinating to watch you going through this journey after you help so many people go through the same journey in blockchain. And we're waiting for your podcast to come out in AI. I'll be devastated if it's not with me, but I'll understand too because you guys are going to the moon. Ian Andrews, thank you for appearing on the Around the Coin podcast and giving us practical things that we could take away and get into AI today.
Stephen, it was a pleasure. We'll talk soon.
Awesome.